happy to invite you formally on behalf of ISB, on behalf of EHAC and Center for Business Markets on this very important topic called value articulation. What we have done at Center for Business Markets, instead of just whiling away the time during COVID, we thought we'll create a curated bunch of webinars that sort of showcase different facets of B2B marketing. Our center is focused on B2B marketing and raising the bar on practice of B2B marketing in India by close working with academic institutions of excellence. So in that regard, we have so far already curated and delivered 7 webinars, and we have 5 more down the road. About by the end of July, we should have a total basket of about 12 webinars. And the idea for this is for those of you who are members, who are prospective members, or who would like to engage more closely with our center, you can actually showcase these webinars or whatever interests you to your cohorts in your organizations. And then if you like some offering, like say relationships or pricing or distribution channels, you can contact Asta or Meenal, and then they can work with you to structure a 2 or 3 day program. Of course, modular, so it will be 2 hours per day or digitally delivered by some of the faculty that we have at ISB. And ISB has a very strong faculty lineup, about 15 people in the marketing area. Nearly all of them are focused on B2B, although they may have other interests as well. So this is by way of introduction of why these webinars are so important to you, and also from our perspective that our sole aim is to raise the level of practice of B2B marketing in India. And so this webinar series fits very, very squarely with whatever we want to achieve in terms of overall vision. Coming now to a further drill down, among the 12, Rajesh and I and Professor Phil Zerello have been involved in a garland of 5 pearls. Why do we call them pearls? All the 12 are pearls, but these are things where we have been directly associated. The first one was Rajesh solo on importance of customer relationships and how do you build a firewall of customer loyalty. The second one was by Phil Zerello, and this is about it's not enough if I'm a supplier organization to look at inwardly at my selling processes. It's very, very important to also look at what are the pain points of the customer, what is he struggling through, and understand the buying process from their end. And unless you do that, you're not going to really make any progress. The third one is today the value articulation. And this is absolutely important, and that's why it comes bang in the center of this garland of 5 pearls. The next one, which we will have possibly on July 10th, and you will get an invite for that, is about the role of business storytelling in value articulation and in engaging with the customers. And the last one, which will be sometime towards the later part of July, would be customer engagement. So it actually flows through a very nice sequence. The first one saying the importance of customer relationships. Without that, if you have a musical chairs of customers coming and changing every time, the organization is not going to take off very far. And then the next one was importance of looking from a customer perspective, what is going on in his mind, and that's what Phil delivered. And today's is how do you go and win in markets which are highly crowded and there are so many competitors for every single offering. So unless you're able to articulate value in a crystal clear manner, you're not going to make any progress. And then we have the business storytelling, which is the next one. And finally, having got customers, a portfolio of customers, how do you engage them? How do you create value that is mutually beneficial, and so on? And there are a lot of techniques for that. And with some good luck, in about 6 months, we will have a book stringing these pearls together, which will be available on Amazon or Flipkart. So we think that this is absolutely vital. The name of the book is Reinvigorating Your Marketing, B2B Marketing in a Digital World, or in a world that is turbulent world, which is fast changing. With that, I will hand over to Rajesh to start formally this discussion. And this will be in a dialogue mode. You're on mute, Rajesh.
I got it, yes. So thank you very much for that quick introduction of CBM and today's context and what we call as a string of pearls. I think today's conversation is actually at the center of the string of pearls, because the centrality of the value articulation and rest of the things are really about concepts and how do you deliver. But the base core has to be strong for any marketer to find success in the marketplace. The first part that I wanted perhaps you to cover is what's happening in the B2B world at this moment. In the sense, assuming pre-COVID, because we have come to a complete standstill in the last 2-3 months, right? Businesses are just getting back to normalcy. They are trying to find their feet on the ground and see what they need to do. But up until now, what was happening in B2B, broad B2B context, and going forward as well, it is relevant.
Okay, friends, this is absolutely something that is of vital importance. In every single webinar, people say this is all fine. How do we do business in a post-COVID world? And so that is what a good bit of what we are going to talk about will focus on that. So the world that is over is BC. The world that is coming ahead of us is AC, before and after COVID. And there is just incredible amount of changes. Of course, a lot of the changes have been happening even before the COVID crisis. But we will spend at least 20% of today's webinar on the COVID and after COVID what. So we are squarely in a realm where there are tremendous tectonic changes. Nobody can deny it. What it was, in fact, if I go back to early 80s, B2B marketing was just rearing its heads in management institutions like IIM Ahmedabad. It used to be called industrial marketing in 1981. And in a batch of 250, probably 7 or 8 students would take that course. It was not so much flavor of the season. But with the passage of time, I've taught at IIM Bangalore, and in a batch of 400 students, 360 used to sign up for B2B marketing. That is how so central it is. And this is because so much of focus has come on services, on consulting, and B2B has become very, very central, and people realize without deep understanding of B2B, their careers will get pretty much stalled. So there are huge number of changes. And the first one is anything you bring, whether it's a hardware like a generator, a DG set, a transformer, or whatever else B2B, excavator, or a software product, whether it's a banking product or software services or solutions, or in the healthcare space, somebody offering telemedicine to hospitals, which is also a B2B, the shelf life is very, very short. It used to be that when you came up with some innovation, you could sit back and then sip a peg of beer or whiskey, whatever is your favorite, for 10 years, nobody will bother you, and you could cruise along for a long time. Today, your tail is perpetually on fire, and you'll be lucky if whatever innovation you bring to the market, has a life of anything beyond a year. So the pressure is constantly, how do you innovate? And this is the shorter shelf life that we are witnessing. So nobody can be complacent, and you have to keep scaling newer and newer peaks. And any leader of any organization who says we have climbed the Mount Everest, it's time for us to now relax for a while and catch our breath, the beginning of the end of that organization is already there in that statement. It is that real. The next one is the choice. There's a diary of choices, if one might use a very colloquial word. There's just too many options. You want anything, the internet has made it possible for some guy sitting in Nicaragua or Angola or wherever to pitch in and say, look, I have a better offering. And so the world, as Tom Friedman says, is become very, very, very flat. Plethora of options from anywhere in the world. And even the so-called walls which we are trying to create with China is just a passing fancy. It's not sustainable in the long run. The world is just too homogeneous in that sense. And therefore, wherever anything you want, there are so many people who are coming in and saying, hey, I have something better than what the other guy is giving. And the other, which is obvious to all of us, is the big giants and their position on the throne is being questioned by small startups. all it requires is that do they have something which is faster, better, and cheaper. And if an innovative company, and some of these innovative companies actually are formed by disgruntled employees from large dinosaur organizations. And you can see that little puppy here, and it can give a hot chase to a rhino or an elephant. So this is, size is no longer an issue at all. And therefore, we have this plethora of choices, which is what it is. So if you call for a request for a quote or a tender or a bid, you will have so many people like you see here. Hey, I can also offer, I can offer the same, I can offer better, I can offer cheaper, and it's more convenient. And therefore, the question for anybody who is on this call, I see 125 people, participants, you will be struggling day and night, whether you're a CEO, finance guy, or operations guy, or sales, or marketing, or HR, whichever function. How can the voice of my company be heard about the cacophony? For example, in HR, how are you going to get the best people to your company and not run away to competitors? And even if you're in HR, how can you work closely with sales, marketing, strategy, operations, R&D, and so on, so that as a company you create some fantastic offerings which stand head over shoulders above competition. So this is the central challenge. In a crude way, this is called commoditization of offerings. That is, any offering you think of, you get a, you go to sleep tonight and then you wake up with a great dream that this is what I'll do. And you'll see that there are already 50 people and 50 more rearing to enter into that marketplace in B2B. Same thing is true in B2C, but our focus on today's discussion is squarely in B2B. So here is an example of a L&D head who is saying, okay, I want to train my people, I want to get them to be industry leaders, and so on. So he's scratching his head, as you can see, and then he goes out into the wide world. Then he contacts ISB, and we of course have some offerings. Then he goes off to some other well-known institute. Then he goes to IIM Ahmedabad, and not to be outdone, he can go to Harvard, he can go to Stanford. He can also go to a whole bunch of digital platforms like edX, Coursera, and Udemy. So how does our institute, ISB, come out of this crowd and say, look, for this L&D head, we have something very, very interesting. So please give us a patient hearing. And what is the way that he will give us a hearing? Unless we are able to actually articulate value, he's not going to waste even a minute of his time. His time has become too precious. And therefore, how do you come out of this confusion? How do you help the customer to resolve his confusion? And the only mantra, 20 years back, now, and 20 years into the future, will be articulation of value. And that's the theme for today. With this, I'm going to hand over to Rajesh, requesting him to speak on a question. I've talked to you in the last 7 or 8 minutes about the changes that are happening in the world of business in general, but B2B marketing as well. And then, apologies, there is some problem with the light, but I'll fix it once I complete my sentence. We have Rajesh, I'd like you to reflect on what are the things that B2B marketeers should do to address these challenges that we have just discussed. And what were the challenges? Plentiful choices, size doesn't matter, there's an overcrowding in the marketplace, and the lead times that you enjoyed in the past are all gone. So if you are a marketeer or a sales guy in a company that is addressing B2B markets, how are you going to actually go to markets? How are you going to make sure that you stand out of the crowd? So over to Rajesh.
Thank you very much, Divya, for that nice context setting of what is coming up. Clearly, the ferocity of commoditization is also hastened. Earlier, there is a company which makes the machines for large plants, the machine manufacturer, like turning, grinding, lathes, and all that. And it's a second generation which is now running that company. The young son, who is about 35-year-old, has taken over. His dad is still at the helm. He's a chairman. And when I was having a casual conversation, his dad told me that earlier, 20 years back, if he had built one new product, it would have been relevant for good 10, 15 years. So the runway for a company in terms of selling that product in terms of shelf life was about 15 years. But the son says now his product changes every week, and the reason is there is a software layer, right? I mean, most of the machines are run by CAD CAM and plethora of other software. And he says every time I come out with a new thing on the software layer, the machine completely behaves differently. So that's the world that we are living in. So let's look at a couple of trends. And these trends are obviously we have been watching. Let's throw more light around it and see what is happening and what is not happening and to what extent. And therefore, what are the challenges for a marketer? The first trend, if you see, is this whole world of social. B2C clearly is disrupted by social world, right? I mean, all our purchasing behavior today are driven on the social media. Most of us, whenever we are browsing through, even without knowing the latent needs, it'll flare up our propensity to buy something, and that's how we make transactions. Now, does it have any impact on the B2B world? That's the question that was going through my mind. And this is about 3-4 years back. We have been seeing, the seeping of B2C angle in B2B. I call that as the difference between B2C and B2B was rational versus emotional, right? Broadly, B2C is highly emotional world where the brand association, the perception about a product is largely intangible. Whereas in B2B, the value articulation is extremely important. So is there any linkage of the social media impact on B2B firms? The answer is yes and no. To what extent and what extent it is not. And that's a point that I wanted to share a little bit of my experience from the practitioner world. What is happening? What is happening is in the social media, if you ask me a turbine manufacturer or a boiler manufacturer, puts up their product advertisement. Will somebody click on it and buy a product for that company? Possibility is perhaps low, at least at this moment. I mean, the B2B transactions are not driven from social media at this moment. They are still a lot more involved buying process. But there is still an impact that is there in terms of the buying behavior or the cycle time that is taken for purchasing. And what that is, mind you, all buyers as individuals, right? There are human beings who are making these decisions. And these people have their own social media profiles. Okay. Mind you, if I'm a component manufacturer based out of Chennai, and I've been selling to, say, Hero Motors in Haryana. Now, the buyer, the VP of purchasing in Haryana, definitely he has a social profile of himself. He has a LinkedIn profile. He's on Facebook, perhaps, and so on and so forth. Now, when I am a seller who also has a profile on the same platform, what is happening is the individuals who are having business conversations are also looking at the social media platform out of curiosity, right? I mean, today, my students definitely know me far more before I start my first class because they want to see who this chap is, okay? So this is going to have a big impact on the purchasing cycle. What it means is, for example, take any of the causes, right? I'm just saying, for want of better, this one, LGBT rights. Now, I have expressed my view on social media, and the buyer vice president has a good opportunity to see what is the thinking that I have. Now, I have conducted myself in a very informal process, using abusive language with several people. There is a form that is formed in his mind. There is a persona which is formed in his mind, which is going to impact in the buying cycle. And therefore, for at least the people who are listening to this, the way we conduct on social media has to be a little bit more controlled or measured. The reason is not for business reasons directly, but indirectly, it is going to influence because the buyer and seller as individuals are on the same platform, and as human beings, the differentiating from a work transaction to the personal transaction is still not so seamless. There is that blurred boundaries, and one spills over into the other. So this is something that we clearly see in the marketplace. So social profiles do influence the purchasing behavior, not directly, but indirect affinity towards a salesperson, right? If I like the thought process or the ethos of a salesperson, I will divulge far more details in terms of the information that he needs to create that value articulation. So this becomes a little bit of a handy tool on how you conduct on social media to glean information and get some favorable outcomes from the seller. So that's one from the buyer. So that's one small trend that we clearly see. The second thing that you clearly see is the company coming across as a humane brand, right? Humanizing of the brands. That is happening on the social media, because anything that appeals to the consumers, what I'm doing to the society, what I'm doing to the world, what I'm doing to the environment, climate, these are all things which make the company humanizing, right? In the sense, people get a better affinity towards such brands than otherwise. So society and companies are also at a loggerhead. If you see broadly, there is a lot of social activism, and therefore companies have to conduct themselves to be at the forefront of engaging with the societies, and social media is one of the platforms that is being extremely useful, and brands are making a good use of it. So the first trend about social media and what's the impact is what I've covered so far. The second trend that, going slightly beyond is, therefore, the content creation on online platforms also becomes very important. And this is one of the surveys done by an organization on B2B buying process. The influencing, it's very interesting to see the case studies are still a big influencer in terms of content management on social media. Okay. So while educating the customer is important, case studies are something that they trust far more than the competitive comparisons. Just take a look at the penultimate one, which I'm circling here, 17%. The 17% is competitive comparison, which means if I were to put it out saying I'm better than you, less people would agree to that than my case study, which is about the customer and a real situation. So that's a very interesting thing. The second one is best practices, which are like thought leadership articles, which will be very helpful. How-to guides, the YouTube. So obviously, what is the percentage of importance people are giving to various platforms as well, or various mediums through which we are communicating. Now, this is something that is going to help you, and this is very clearly B2B, and I'm not talking about B2C here. I'm just trying to make sure all of you understand the context behind these numbers. Okay. Let me move forward. The second trend that is happening in the consumer world, does it have any impact on B2B, which is online shopping? Now, they are saying still India, 85% is non-traditional, our old style Kirana stores, which are, brick and mortar retail is what is contributing to our retail buying. So online is roughly about 10-12%. Even in B2C, it is nascent, but at least in urban settings, most of us order a bulk of our purchases online. Now, what is happening to the B2B world? Are customers buying really on online platforms? Now, there are two answers to this. Yes and no. Yes is in the global world. In the developed world, really about good 80-90% of non-strategic purchasing has moved online. Like, the stationery, for example, there is no direct delivery from the manufacturer anymore, because the online platforms are able to bring far superior pricing advantages and the bouquet of offerings. So online platform is something that is very, very ubiquitous in the developed world. Whereas in our part of the world, I know, we ran one small research last year, if you remember, with the procurement heads of different B2B companies. It was very evident that the pace of this embracing online purchasing for B2B is still nascent. Non-strategic buying still now is moving there, right? Large players have that buying power, so they can go with the direct rep from a brand, but smaller companies at least are buying it online. And the number of companies that I've shown here, online platforms, are all operating in India. So you can imagine how crowded it is getting. Okay, so clearly non-strategic buying is moving online. Now, therefore, the relevance of salespeople, relevance of customer-facing people, relevance of marketing people is still very, very high in Indian B2B market context, maybe for that matter, all emerging market context. Now, what does that still mean is something that we need to look at. Because as you mentioned, the information is power, but information power is now handed over to the customer. Customer has a choice of looking for information that he needs and when he wants and where he wants. So clearly, that power has been given back to the customer. So therefore, what is the trend that we are seeing? So McKinsey ran a survey with the purchasing managers, and this is what they found. 76% of the buyers still preferred a conversation with a sales rep during the first time purchase. So I'm again giving it some time for people to fathom. 76% of the buyers, preferred a conversation with the sales reps during the first time purchase. So if I'm buying anything, it is still touch and feel that I love, right? So salespeople are still relevant, or B2B marketers are still relevant. But as you glean through further information, what happens in the second purchase, and so on and so forth, there are some slightly heartening, observations. One is the figure was 50% for the next purchase, which means second time when you come, they said, I don't need, at least 50% of the people said, I don't need anybody. I understand how to buy, I'll buy that, right? The third is even more stark and something that we need to worry about if we are on the sell side of it. Only 15% wanted to speak with the sales reps for the same product. So if it is the same product, and which means that a sales rep cannot add additional value, only 15% of the people wanted to speak to the sales reps, which means what is the role of relationship? That's something that we need to seriously question now, right? We always said, no, the relationship has a play. It has a play, but if your product is not having a complexity where you need to discover some things on every touch point, and it is very straightforward, exact same stuff the customer is ordering, the relevance of sales reps is reducing. Okay, so this is very important for from 2-3 perspective. One, each sales rep has to seriously question what is the value addition they are bringing. One. Second, it has an impact on the sales structures. How many people I needed in sales organization in itself is under threat in some way, right? Or the way I would need the skills of people that I need in my sales organization has an impact because of this. What in essence coming out, if I were to get an inference from this, is that 76% of the people have called me as a sales rep to hear me out is because they want to be educated, and therefore salespeople have to learn the art of educating the customers. So no longer it is about coming and giving you a brochure, price tags, and all those closing techniques alone. It is all about thinking of the marketing. So that's what is very clearly visible here. This was the old style where the marketing thinking was very small in the salespeople. When you say marketing, what does it mean? Deeply understanding the customer, deeply understanding the marketplace, deeply knowing what benefits my products have over the competition, and therefore bringing all that articulation into the play. Much of it was done intuitively by the marketing team, the customer himself, and the sales thinking was very much necessary, which was, you used to use the term always be closing. I remember that in our classrooms. And so the techniques of closing were very important, but now that is, reversed, which means the sales guy has to be able to educate the customer on how this offering is going to make a difference. And therefore the closing part is not such a predominant part. So I hope this is something that is very clear. So the two trends that I've talked about, which are prevalent in consumer markets, one is social media, the second one is the online purchasing. What is the impact of these two on B2B? In the first part, which is social media, there is an impact from a buyer-supplier human relationship perspective, and therefore the kind of affinity towards each other, and hence how do we need to conduct is important. Second, humanizing the brands is something that is very well, very well facilitated by the social media. The second part, which is the online purchase, is, non-strategic purchasing is slowly moving to online. Therefore, it is extremely important to understand what is the role of a sales rep there. And the second thing that we saw in that part B, was from the McKinsey report, which is the educating the customer is the greatest skill a sales rep has to embrace. And the sales structures will definitely take a different shape over a period of time. Now, let's see what has happened, turn the clock to COVID, right? And I think, I covered this little bit in the previous session also, but there could be a few participants who might not have had the advantage of listening to the previous webinar. So what has COVID done, right? What has COVID done is the casualty has been trust, because, in a B2B world, the direct selling was still a large component, or at least a significant component. And therefore, the touch and feel of a sales rep, the sales rep meeting the customer in person, the meetings and taking them to the fruition in terms of an order creation and order receiving the order, all that is going to take a hit because we can't travel as much. Second, there is this whole social distancing, and hence most of the transactions will have to happen over the phone calls or video calls and things like that. And therefore, when we looked at, both of us, when we did that analysis, one of the biggest thing that a human touch brought was trust. And that is the biggest casualty today. And, clearly, I think you said that in the beginning. In this context, are there the old concepts still relevant? And that's what, I would request you to go and narrate a little bit more. You have already said value articulation is important. And it will be unfair if I didn't say this. My own understanding of the value articulation came from you. You've been one of the flag bearers for India, at least. You have the book that you have written with Jim Narus and Jim Anderson and Jim Narus has been phenomenal. It is a very intuitive, thing that we all build a business case, right? End of the day, when I'm selling as a marketer, I do build a business case for the customer. But to what extent it can be built is something that I really admire from the concept that you taught us. If you can take us all through that basic concept of, the value, how do you quantify with one example, that'll be very, very beneficial for all the audience. So back to you, Divya.
Okay, thank you, Rajesh, for taking us through how B2B marketeers have to change track, so to speak, in terms of practice going forward. And now, what is the thing that is a continuity from the past? There is no question that just because there is a digital platform or social media, the buyer is going to throw value in the garbage can and say, okay, I'm very happy with glitzy presentations and nice seaside views and so on. This is all hygiene factors, like you're seeing me sitting in the Bahamas beach. But at the end of the day, we go back to the good old value. So just to give you an example, Rajesh and I have written a case that is about telemedicine. Two youngsters relocated from Cleveland, Ohio, from what is that hospital?
Cleveland Clinic.
Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah.
And they were actually intensivists at Cleveland Clinic, and they were obviously earning huge piles of money. But somewhere when they visited India once in a while and they saw the reality of intensive care once you leave metros like Bangalore or Delhi or Mumbai, even you go 100 kilometers away, like things are very, very bad. So they said, why can't we use digital technologies to go to hospitals in Agra or Patna or Varanasi or one step lower to tier 3 cities or towns. And when you're doing that sort of a thing, there is a huge mindset shift that is required for the guy who is operating the hospital in Agra. Why should he even consider this option? Of course, there are so many regulations and so many restrictions, but unless you're able to show a good case of value, you're not going to be able to make any dent as cloud physician to enter into those hospitals. What does value mean in that context? Maybe his beds are getting filled. Maybe the success rate of the patients coming back out of an intensive care situation to normalcy is far better. So the reputation is good. Maybe the staff that he has to engage, the costs are reduced in some magical way, whatever else it is. And unless you're able to put rupees, lakhs, crores on the table and show, look, come to me, And this is again a crowded space. There are some 50 other people offering Me Too, because in India or anywhere in the world, if you have a good offering, within a month or 2 or 3, you can be sure that there'll be a lot of Me Too copycats. So how do you establish value firmly and squarely? This is the challenge before us, and this is what I'll spend the last 10 minutes of this presentation on. Yes, please. So if you're a very, very mediocre or below average sales guy, in the past, what you would do, you'd go and talk about features. Hey, our product has this, we use in this context or example that I said, we use some Siemens cameras, or we use some Intel chips, or this or that. And then if you migrate to being a good sales guy, you will move from features into advantages. Please consider what we have. This is going to help you to, the advantage is it's a very robust system. Even if there's violent fluctuation in power, the system will stay, because we have a lot of 8 hours of backup of power, and it is quite amenable to large voltage fluctuations. It is quite resilient to dust conditions and heat that you might find in a remote hospital in Varanasi or so on. So those are advantages. And then you start moving into benefits. So if you're an excellent sales guy, so an average sales guy will stop at features. A good guy will go to advantages. An excellent guy will say, well, these are the benefits. This is what my offering solves. Going back to that cloud physician example, my offering, when we say product, it means offering. It means either a software, service, whatever, a bundle of all these things. It helps to reduce the mortality of patients. And remember, this is a B2B case that I'm talking about. And if you're an extraordinary sales guy, so average, good, excellent, and extraordinary, then you will move to worth. That means what is the tangible value in money, rupees, lakhs, crores. And then there are also some intangible things that the people in a 100-kilometer vicinity will talk greatly about this company and so on. And then you will be a thought leader. And maybe the government of India Health Ministry will pick up this and then invite you, and you will be asked to give some talk at a national forum and so on. So those are all the perceived value. Of course, from a customer's angle, the hospital that is using it becomes a role model, and others will come to you and say, hey, kya jugaad kiya aapne? So those are all the perceived value. And this is what we are now talking about. And it is much, much, much more important in a post-COVID world, because money is scarce. We all know that businesses are down, and therefore value will become far more central than maybe 5 years back when things were a bit more lackadaisical. Okay, so there is a competitor's offering, and then how am I going to go and compete with it? The only way I can do it is through articulating value. And the value has two major components, as you can see. One is, can you help the customer to increase his revenues? And can you help the customer to reduce his cost? That's all there is. At the end of the day, the customer is not in a charity business. He's running his business. He's under enormous pressure. COVID is only going to intensify the pressure multifold. And in that context, we just don't have an option but to say, hey, if you use my offering, and that is when, if you're able to articulate this, that the balance that you see here will tilt in your favor. Otherwise, he'll poo-poo you out and say the competitors is better. So what can you do to help him to augment his revenues? So his sales volumes increase by the offering that you have. Or maybe that because what you're giving to him is an important ingredient in his offering, he can get a better price, he can demand a premium price from his customers, or he can increase his production and increase his volumes and market share and so on. The other side is it can help him to reduce his running expenses, some overheads, maybe his maintenance costs are less. In any case, the value finally boils down in monetary terms to just two things: something that helps the revenue to boost, and on top of it, you can add cost savings that you can deliver to the customer. In some situations, there may not be much you can do in terms of revenue, helping the customer to increase revenue. You may probably have only cost savings, but that's good enough. In some other cases, you may not be able to touch the cost side. You may only be able to impact the revenue, but that is good enough. In some cases, you may have the leverage of both. That is, help the customer increase his or her revenues and also reduce the costs, which means cost savings. So what this means is you really have to get under the skin of the customer. It's no longer adequate to talk about platitudes. And this is something which we have been talking about for the last about 20 years. That has not changed. But I'm only re-emphasizing that in a post-COVID world, this becomes far, far more important. Okay, so here is an example of translating value elements. So you take your offering and then break it down into all sort of elements. So here is an example of, let's say, a guy is like SKF selling some superior bearings. These are some cylindrical bearings or whatever. And then you have to start digging into the customer's reality. That's what we just concluded now. Rajesh, you can show the whole thing. So, you can just talk about great quality of my bearings, but that's not going to cut much ice. That is still at the features or advantages. But if you have to come down to benefits and then worth, you have to say the product that you make from the machine that uses these bearings is going to be far better. You can use less experienced operators, or there are lower rejection and returns. There are fewer breakdowns of the machine. There is lower maintenance cost. There is longer life of the machine that is using these components. So some of them will touch the cost side. Some of them will touch the revenue side. Some will touch both. So just to illustrate, a longer life is more on the cost savings. You don't have to replace the machine so often, for example. Low maintenance cost is again on the cost savings. And then fewer breakdowns is on the cost side and the revenue side. Then lower rejections, that is whatever comes out of the machine, the output, they will have fewer rejections because the precision of these bearings is so much, and therefore the fewer returns, and therefore you're going to have more revenue, and you're also going to reduce the cost of lost production which has to be scrapped. Then less experienced operators is going to impact the cost side. And better finished product, you can go to your customer and then say, hey, you know what, you can actually sell, your customer can sell his product to his customer and get premium. So these are the type of deep thinking that's required, but it's not enough to just put ticks in these type of boxes and be happy with it. The next drill down is you actually have to go and decode what is the money saving, what is the extra revenue the customer gets, what is the cost reduction that the customer gets, and so on. And this is a very, very, it requires a deep dive into the customer's world. And now the question in B2B is, how are you going to go to each customer? Because the realities of each customer are very, very different. It's not possible. If you have 5,000 customers, you can't decode that. So broadly, what is done in all these type of things is segmentation, which you're all familiar with. So you say, okay, this market is broadly into 3 high-end users, middle-end users, low-end users, or whatever. And then for each segment, you try to develop value models. And this is an example that we're going to take you through just now. This is an example of Intel. By the way, Rajesh, as we close, you can just take a look at the Q&As. There are several. So this is Intel, which is basically saying, what is their objective? They want to sell the latest computers or laptops, which have the latest chips that they have come up with. And they don't want the customer hanging on to some laptop that was developed and sold some 5 or 10 years back. So they have to get down to the value. How are you going to incentivize the customer to say, hey, dude, unless you change to the latest PC, you'll be losing money hand over fist. So here is a very telling ad. This will come in a typical trade magazine or trade journal that a customer would access. Holding on to an old computer is costing you 1.87 lakh rupees per year. And therefore, change your PC, change your business. That's the only way that Intel can start pushing newer chips into the market. And that is required for them to keep their advantage over competitors, because only then they can fund their R&D. Otherwise, the R&D pipeline dries if you say that customers are not buying, not replacing, they're just hanging on to 10-year-old laptops and so on. So this is a very telling thing, which any sensible customer will put the numbers together and say, I have 500 laptops in my organization. And from this calculation, it is 500 into 1.87. that is some 10 crores or 9 crores or whatever it is. But it's not enough to just talk about that ad. So if you go back, Rajesh, in that there is a small fine print, which on a screen like this, you won't be able to see, but in a print that comes in a trade journal or even in a soft copy, the guy can read that small fine print, which is in 7 font or smaller. But we have just expanded it for you in the next slide. So here is the actual logic, because the customer is not going to be amused if you say, look, you will save 1.87 lakhs. He wants actual basis. Where is that 1.87 lakhs coming from? So here is the narration, and the bottom small font that we have put is basically some disclaimer. So I leave that out. But every 5-year or older computer you have is costing you 1.87 lakhs per year, rupees. This is based, so you're actually giving an authentic source. You can't just say, you know, I dreamt about this figure yesterday night, or my grandmother told me that this is what it is, and so on. That doesn't fly. So it has to be an authentic source like a Gartner or XYZ. So this is based on a 2018 web-based survey commissioned by Intel and conducted by J. Gold Associates of 200 small business owners. So remember, this is basically the segmentation. So whatever this ad would reach, targeted to small business owners, not to, you know, somebody like Aditya Birla Group and so on. And this was done across countries, India, Australia, China, Japan, and US, to assess the challenges and costs associated with deploying older PCs. So this is as authentic as it gets. And so the survey respondents estimated that for PCs older than 5 years, employees would be about 30%. Actual number is 27.93% less productive based on average assumed employee salary of $10,000. And this is typical even in an Indian context, you know, about 7-8 lakhs type of figure. The lost productivity will cost the amount to US dollar 2,793. The conversion rate is about 67 rupees as of some date. So the point that I want to underline is you are being extremely specific, not just pie in the sky figures that you're dreaming out. So it is verifiable. And obviously this whole value articulation will be different if it is a mid-sized company or if it's a large company. It will be a very different value proposition. But where is this productivity loss happening? Sometimes the damn thing doesn't start. He has to kick the computer. He has to call somebody to attend to it because it is not working, or it's very slow in booting up. So if you do all those analysis, this is a lot of money that is going down the drain. So this is not touching the revenue side. It is touching the cost side of the customer of these PCs. I hope you're able to see that difference. So the cost savings is what you're trying to harp on. That if you change to a new computer, you will save 1.87 lakhs. Okay, then we come to the last. There is no escape from this whole thing of value. And it is not just that the sales and marketing guys have to create the value. There is a concept called integrated marketing, which means every single function in the organization is responsible for making sure that superior value is delivered to the customer. Every single function. It could be HR, it could be admin. For example, the admin might have some prehistoric rules by which things are getting held up at the gate, people coming in, or material coming in, there's long lines and so on. So everywhere value is getting drained. So can you study the whole value creation ecosystem of your organization, of your customer organization, and then that is absolutely important. So whether it's R&D or purchasing or logistics or sales, marketing, operations, legal, everybody has to put their best foot forward to create the superior value. And therefore it is called integrated marketing. Please remember this term. This is very, very important. It's not at all advisable to relegate or delegate this value adding to just a few people who are in the sales and marketing. That will be a disservice to the organization unless the whole organization rallies behind them and brings this culture of value articulation, and everybody is focused. Hey, for this customer segment, this is the value we are creating. Then a lot of ideas come up. Hey, what can we do to increase the value? Because remember, this is a moving target. If you say I'm saving 1.87 lakhs per year, the competitor is right now maybe not AMD. is saving 60,000 per year, but he is also going to do something magical. So in a year, remember we talked about the shortened cycles. So in a year, he will come to 1.87 lakhs saving for the customer. So what do you have to do next year? You have to move that figure to 3 lakhs. That's not going to come by just sales guys. Everybody in the organization has to rally behind and make sure that this value articulation is the culture, and constantly new ideas to create this value and articulate it. With that, we are pretty much done for the day. I want to just summarize that without value articulation, you just cannot make any progress in B2B markets. And I'll give you a live example. We are talking to some important clients at CBM, and obviously, this is in L&D, which Rajesh or I talked about it in the earlier part, that there are so many options for the company. There are a dozen people who are offering whatever. Let's say that we are talking about distribution channels for the company, a 3-day program followed by some consulting assignment. And we are quoting some X amount, but there are people who are quoting 10% of X. There are people who are quoting 30% of X. There are also people who are quoting 5X. For example, somebody in Stanford might be quoting much more. So how do we get into that game and be able to crystal clear manner articulate the value? This is a challenge, and this is where we really have to put our thinking caps day in and day out and make this a reality. We now have time for about 10 minutes for questions. So the scheduled ending time is about 7:15, I think, as per the flyer that we sent out, but we can close by 7:10. So I'll let Rajesh do the coordination for the Q&A.
Great, Divya. Thank you so much. So I'm going to run through some of the questions which are far more relevant. And you can also add on if there is a point of view which you want to share. One of the things that is mentioned here is, about the government purchases especially on the GEM platform, GEM platform. And the point is, they are all diluted specs, allowing supplier who in true terms do not qualify to sell the product. How this can be treated, so what they are trying to say is some of the suppliers will just go and commit to everything, but they are not able to deliver that. Now, Mr. Raman, and it's a question from Raman. It's a lovely question. Often we are countered with this one when we talk about value, right? The e-tendering process, where there is a blind man on the other side and there is no procurement soul. It is a system which is deciding more or less. I would like to throw light upon a little bit more. It is not just about India or something like that. In most government contracts in the emerging world, there is the failure rate of the public projects is something that we need to really look at. I'm not saying our projects are failing miserably, but we need to really look at the utility of those projects. How many projects end up seeing the light of the day? Those which have seen light of the day, what is being delivered? Now, governments, while they try to change this game, because we have had some discussions in certain forums with the leaders from the public life, it's a system, right? I mean, they are also held responsible because it is the citizens' money. When you're spending public money, there are certain contours within which the guidelines are defined. And unless that is changed and our legal system really is able to figure out and say, this was a legitimate purchase for which the tendering was given to a high-priced player, I think that cycle has to change. Unless that changes, it is not going to be easy, Mr. Raman. I will be, I'll be submitting to what you're saying, that it is not easy. Okay. But we can clearly see the movement in the right direction. And I think, some of the, at least people in the places of authority are clearly articulating saying, no, we need to change our L1 T1 mechanisms, which is, the lowest price and the best technology. You can't get that combination, and it can't be always the lowest priced.
Rajesh, if I may intervene here, there are a couple of things here because this is important. A lot of B2B happens on tendering and government and big purchases. One thing is we have to understand even the decision makers have a lot of accountability and answerability. So if it's an IAS officer and well-meaning IAS officers, and today with the digital that has come in, there's a lot of transparency that has come in. So under the table deals and all would become a thing of the past. There is tremendous amount of ombudsman and oversight, governance that is happening in every single purchase. And this is going to be much more going forward. And once we move to a digital money, that is all this cash and all that becomes a thing of the past, which is happening, then the traceability of slush funds and all that is going to reduce. That's not to say that human beings will change overnight, but nevertheless, ministers, what do they want? They want to be re-elected. Babus or bureaucrats want to be seen in good light. They want to be called to Washington or somewhere to do some thought leadership, or Delhi or wherever it is, of some of the great things that they have done. Some project which is hugely successful and so on. There's another thing called adjusted bid price, which means there's a lot of weightage for things other than just price. So all the technical features that Rajesh was talking about are also factored in. And you might actually find, once you get into adjusted bid price, which is becoming very common, that the H1, that is the highest bidder, becomes L1 after doing this adjusting. So there are a lot of techniques in tendering that have been in vogue for some time now, where people realize, the buyer realizes just harping pig-headedly on L1 is going to be of great disservice. The projects get delayed, the quality will be bad, and so on. And therefore, it is very, very important to go for this adjusted bid price. So value is still important in tendering situation. That's where we leave that question and move on. Mute, Rajesh.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. Every sales team today talks about the customer value with their prospects. So how do we differentiate our messaging of value? I think DVR mentioned that in his discussion towards the end, which is that it is never ending process, in the sense, once you put out that this is my value proposition, you get a runway for about 6 to 12 months, 18 months, or 24 months, or 5 years, depending upon which industry, what product you are offering. And once that runway is over, obviously the game is to reinvent yourself or drive your innovation in a way the next value stack is already created. So you cannot rest on your laurels anymore. And the number of players being around, being far too many and from different parts of the world, it's only getting a little bit more complicating. But as salespeople, we need to serve ourselves with this value context, at least in what we have in our hand. And that in itself is not happening to a greater extent. DVR, anything to add?
Yeah, there I would like to say that, why should the customer even give you time? Whether it is face-to-face, of course, is a thing of the past, but even digitally on a, MS Teams or whatever forum, why should he give you time? Unless he feels that you are there to help him and his organization to succeed. Primary, that his organization should succeed. And secondly, he should also be made to look like a hero in his organization. And so the whole thing is, are you an expert? Do you have something to add to his wisdom? Or are you going to just rehash some old masala and put it in front of him? So this puts a tremendous bar on the sales guy, marketing guys to be on the top of the learning curve of the domain in which they are working, which means you bring serious expertise. And that is where the whole thing gets into consultative selling and so on. So the key word there is, what credibility do you have by which it's not enough to just have value. He also needs to give you a window of time by which, or a mind space by which he is able to hear what you have to say. That comes from credibility. So do you have, in a meeting also you will find, I'm sure in your own companies, that some people keep talking and talking and nobody pays attention. They'll be fiddling with their phones and so on. But there are one or two guys, when they open their mouth, there is pin drop silence. They may speak for only 1 minute in a 1 hour meeting, but when they speak, there is tremendous attention by the others. And that's all about credibility. So the question is, as sales guys, as marketing guys, how do you build that credibility about yourself, about your persona, and also about your company? I think without that, it's very hard to do this, play this value game.
DVR, thank you. I think that also addresses one of the questions from Seeb. Sometimes procurement people are not concerned on value. They are concerned only on price. They shield the salespeople from the users. How do you overcome this challenge? Clearly, there is a nuance of, this is where a salesperson is indeed required, right? and it is the ability of the salespeople to work within the system ecosystem, and his or her maneuverability within a customer organization, building relationship, finding them in neutral forums. So there are several other ways that you have to reach out. So the moment you bring the point is, there is a concept of value merchant versus value spendthrift. Now, a value merchant organization will always look for selling value, where value spendthrift will be one which doesn't consider value as an important lever. So you need to know, even on the buyer side, what kind of a mindset they have. There is no point playing a piano in front of a buffalo, for example, just to push the envelope. And in the same context, we have to find for whom this value is extremely important within the buying organization. Divya, anything to add, or?
Yeah, no, there are a whole lot of techniques, and if you're interested, you can get in touch with us, and we can guide you to some books on how do you get to the key decision makers, not bypassing, but with the help of the procurement guy himself. Because at the end of the day, every organization and every person within the organization is accountable for the success, and therefore there are a lot of very, very nice techniques by which you can actually pull in the right people who can throw their weight. I'm talking about right people in the customer organization. And once they come on board, then generally the procurement guy will have to fall in line. That doesn't mean you can antagonize the procurement guy. So how do you hold his hand? It is all again about building relationships. How do you connect from heart to heart rather than, at a mental level? How do you penetrate beyond the mind to a heart where the guy actually is able to eat out of your palms? So these are all about yourself raising your own level of, let me use a very, very loaded word, consciousness, by which when you open your mouth, the guy who is hearing you knows that you have his interest upmost in his mind, in your mind, so then he would eat out of your hands. I mean, I've said a very loaded sentence, but if you like, we can debate it offline, but this is what it is. If I feel that it's a frivolous type of interaction, why would I waste my time with you? So credibility, then connecting with the heart, and there are many, many wonderful techniques for this.
Yeah, there was one light question. I think we'll take that and then possibly wrap up the today's session. It is, does trust always precede value? I just want to clarify that value is a way to build trust. And when I have done that kind of a research and really understood your situation, which is the customer situation, and I am in my conversation, in my every communication, I'm making it very clear how what I am offering is going to make a difference in your life. That's the way to start building trust. So especially in a environment where the human touch is not possible, our other actions become extremely important in reinforcing this fact that I care for you. And that act of caring in B2B world, the fundamental thing is about articulating value, which is very, very relevant for you. I would just leave it with that part.
Rajesh, I'd like to supplement that with a view for those who are interested in pursuing this a little more. I would encourage you to go and listen to one talk that will be uploaded. I think it's already uploaded. Meenal can confirm on personal leadership. So all these things, value and all is good, but when you're facing the customer, does the customer feel that you genuinely care for him? Or does the customer feel that you're just interested in getting a sale, getting your bosses to be happy with you and tick off a box and get your incentives and move on? So if you go to that personal leadership, which is a webinar that I did some time back, you will find that there are 3 states that a salesman can operate at, which is the lower state is inertial state, the next state is the energetic state, and the last state is the peaceful state. So if you're able to graduate to that peaceful state, the customer and you actually commune at a very, very deep level. And he knows that you have the best interest of the customer at the top of your mind. In the process, of course, you also gain. But at the lower level of inertial state, the customer is very, very quick to spot that you are there to get a quick sale and move on. So this is how do you actually keep moving or evolve to that sort of a level. So for those who are seriously concerned with this question of trust and so on, please also supplement that with listening to that webinar on personal leadership. That might give you some tips as well. With that, we are bringing this to a close. For those who are interested, some more in about 6 months, you please look out for a book that will be out in the market, and this will be called Reinvigorating the Sales and Marketing in B2B Markets in Today's Turbulent World. That's a rough title. So we are today on July 1st. So by 1st January, it should be on the book stands. With that, thank you all for your fantastic attention and questions. And Meenal, my voice was clear, right? There was a feedback that it was not. Okay.
Yeah, but it was clear to me.
Okay, and also we want to flag you that we have 4 more events at least that are coming up, 2 where Rajesh and I will be continuing to do Jugalbandi. The very next one is on business storytelling, which builds on this topic of value articulation. How do you articulate value? Storytelling is one way. The last one is customer engagement. Having got a customer, how do you keep engaging with him so that the whole relationship is reinvigorated? Otherwise, it's like a marriage, if you just get married and then forget it and take each other for granted, pretty soon each will go their diverse way. But if you have to, keep that relationship sacrosanct, then you go and buy some flower one day, then you buy some, surprise dinner or whatever else it is. So you create surprises. So there's a whole lot of stuff that can be done to keep the customer engaged and bring renewed life into the relationship. So that's the last one. But in between, we also have at least two other talks. So we'll end up having a total of a basket or boutique of 12 buffet of 12 offerings. And if your organizations are interested to delve deeper into any one of these topics or combination of them, just ping Meenal or Asta and we'll be happy, or then we can connect you to the right person who can deliver this in a very effective way. So thank you one and all. Thank you Meenal for orchestrating this, and thank you Asta as well.